To attain excellence, you must care more than others think wise, risk more than others think safe, and dream more than others think practical. Hey guys, today we're taking a look at Within the Sphere of the Master. My recollections as a student and longtime colleague of Adolph Herseth, Trumpeter Supreme of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. So this is a really cool book written by a guy named Timothy Kent, who played with Bud. Now, this book is really his biography within the musical section of his life. It's not a full autobiography, but it talks a lot about Bud, but it is from his... This book isn't all about Bud Herseth. This book is all about Timothy Kent and his interactions with Bud Herseth on top of that. And there's a big section on that, and a lot of it is based around that, but I don't want you to think going into this book, like I kind of assumed, it was all about Bud Herseth. A lot of it is, not all of it is though. Now, we'll get a little bit into who Timothy Kent is. Really interesting dude. But let me just kind of go through how this book is laid out. So, starts off with a preface, and then we have a prelude talking about Timothy Kent's upbringing, from the years 1949 to 1967. Chapter 2 is about his time at University of Michigan, along with CSO recordings, and when he started taking lessons with Bud. So that's in 1967 to 1970. Chapter 3 is the training period in Chicago, from 1971 to 1973, which kind of goes over his recollections as being a member of the Chicago Civic Orchestra. Next, Chapter 4 is about Timothy Kent's European adventures from 1973 to 1975. He was a trumpet player. When he first got out of Civic, he won a few jobs in Europe, maybe just one. He played at an orchestra in Europe for a couple years. Chapter 5, he moved back to Chicago and he did freelancing from 1975 to 1978. And then he became a member of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in January of 1979, going up to November of 1996. Now that chapter is about 100 pages long, one chapter. So you'd think he could have broken that up a little bit. We'll get into that too. I'll keep going for now. Chapter 7 talks about the after years, the postlude, his life after the trumpet, which we'll also get into. And then Chapter 8 is all about trumpet lessons with Bud Herseth, which I found to be the most useful. Like a lot like this book, Arnold Jacobs' Song and Wind. A lot more like tips on how to play and stuff like that from Bud Herseth. Oh man.
And stuff like that from Bud Herseth. Oh man.
But it kind of like also sprock Arnold Jacobs as well. Stay. All right. So let's get into it a little bit. As I talked about, let's talk about the overall writing. I gave this 5 stars on my Goodreads. I probably would have given a 4.5 if I could. As I began reading, I was not excited. I remember the first few days I was reading this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a slow read. Now, Timothy Kent wrote this himself, published it. He's a pretty good writer, but some of the stuff that he said, I was just like, why does this matter? Like, he just kind of dragged on a few times for me. Once we got more into it, it was all really interesting stuff, and I was glad he went into some of the stuff, but at the very beginning of his life, you know, he was saying just some of the weirdest stuff. And I will say, Timothy Kent is not your average dude, and I think it's kind of cool, but interesting. Let me just read the other books that he has written. Other books. And the other books we've got on here are Birch Bark Canoes of the Fur Trade, Volumes 1 and 2. Tequamanon Tales, Experiences of an Early French Trader and His Native Family. Poncheron at Detroit, A Guide to the Daily Lives of Fur Trade and Military Personnel, Settlers and Missionaries and French Posts, Volume 1 and 2. Paddling Across the Peninsula, an important cross-Michigan canoe route during the French regime. Rendezvous at the Straits, Fur Trade and Military Activities at Fort Debaud and Fort Michilimackinac, 1669-1781, Volumes 1 and 2. And this book about being a trumpet player with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Yeah, I'm not joking. This is him. Let me show you a picture of him. So this, during his trumpet years, right? After his trumpet years. So he's a descendant of fur traders in like Canada. There's a lot of talk about Wisconsin in here too. That's where I live. He eventually settled in Michigan, but he had the dream job. He was fourth trumpet of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, replaced by John Hagstrom, who is actually my teacher's teacher. Brent Turney studied with John Hagstrom. So kind of cool. My grand teacher took this dude's spot, but he left that to become a full-time academic scholar studying Native American and fur trading canoeing, and it kind of gets into that in the last chapter. Some of it I just skimmed over. I'm personally not super interested in canoeing and fur trade, and I will tell you right now, I will most likely not read his other books. But I just wanted to let you know that. So that's the guy right here, and this is him with Bud. There's a bunch of other pictures in here too. Now, I'm ragging on the book a little bit because it's a little different. This is a really, really good book, and I think for sure anyone who wants to be an orchestral trumpet player, this is a must-read, I would say. If you're going to be an orchestral trumpet player, or excuse me, just an orchestral player or a trumpet player in general, it's an interesting read for sure. Bud Herseth is, I don't think many people would argue, one of, if not the greatest orchestral trumpet players of all time. So this is it's a really good book. There's a lot of great information. Like I said at the very end, there's a bunch of information, just like tips for practicing, cornet versus trumpet here. I'm not showing you as I'm doing this, but starting the tone. Like I said, it's very much like Song and Wind for the last chapter. And a lot of this information is really cool. It kind of shows behind the scenes in an orchestra what it's like practicing, traveling. Tim Kent, as much as he's an interesting dude, he talks a lot about how he balanced his life. He had 2 children and a wife, along with being a trumpet player with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, along with, while he was in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, he was doing all this research, so he was prepared to leave the CSO, regarding all the canoeing and stuff. So it's really interesting just seeing how he balanced his time, how he practiced. He was a huge traveler in Europe, and how he practiced in his car for like 3 hours a day throughout their travels to stay in shape. And there's a lot of really, really cool insights into this. It also talks a little bit what life was like, back in the day, especially as an orchestral trumpet player living in Chicago. There's just a lot of great information in here. He talks a lot about auditions, how he got his job, the various ups and downs that he had throughout his playing career. There's a whole list of recommended excerpts. I actually printed off, I made a copy of it just so I could have a separate copy of like excerpts that are called. This was, from several years ago, so the lists have kind of altered, but they're all excerpts that I need to know. So there's so much great information in here. And it talks a lot about sitting next to Bud and what that was like, and things that Bud always said. And it was a really great book. It just shows the level of excellence that you need to be in the top 1%, which is a lot of these books back here that I've been reading talk about just that. It's not easy to do this stuff, to be the best of the best. And Timothy Kent did that. and so did Bud Herseth and all these other great trumpet players that are listed in here, along with the other brass members of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, which is arguably the most historically famous brass section ever. You know, that's one of the only sections that I can name just about every member in the whole brass section, not just the trumpet section. So, and it also talks about a lot of players who, like the trumpet players. Charlie Geyer is in here. John Hagstrom, as I said. There's a list of principal trumpet players. It talks a little bit about Chris Martin taking over, very briefly, because this book did come out not terribly long ago, but it wasn't like, you know, last year or anything. Let me look here. Yeah, copyright is 2006, so came out, I mean, relatively recently. But I feel like this book is definitely not nearly as famous as Song in Wind, and there is a reason for that. But it is a really great book. If you are a trumpet player, you gotta check it out. You gotta get through some of the stuff, but overall, nothing against Timothy Kent either. He's a pretty good writer, and this book has helped me a lot. So I don't want to make fun of him or take it away anything that he's done. It's just very, you know, it's especially for someone who's not in the trumpet world. You might think reading a book about an orchestral trumpet player is crazy. Think about, I read a book about an orchestral trumpet player who became a researcher for paddling canoes and fur trade. There is not a book like this in the world, I swear to God. The most eclectic book I've ever read. But there was a lot of really great knowledge in it. I will look back to this. I will probably reread this in the future. And if you look through here, I didn't underline as much stuff but there's a lot in here that I did underline as I just paged through it. It's especially the last chapter as it was wrapping everything up. Just gives great tips. To developing and aspiring players, I would recommend focusing on these activities. Listening frequently, intently to find players in many different genres. Practice moderation, do plenty of vocalizing, play various styles and genres. Always as musically and artistically as possible. Seek out a teacher who focuses very much on the artistic approach with only light focus on technical and physical aspects. You know, this I almost underlined this whole page, the last page of the book. And that last quote I said, to attain excellence, when I started the video off, that's the last sentence in the book. This is a really good book. Writing is really, really okay. And it's a little odd at times, but I'm really glad I read this book. This is one of the best books I've read this year. Just for me personally, all the knowledge that I got from it. Just because as far as I know, this is one of the only, if not the only, book about Bud Herseth that's out there. As someone who wants to do exactly what he did, you know, he was the best at what he did. So reading this book was, I don't want to say life-changing, because that makes it, I don't know if I'd go that far, but it has definitely changed the way I looked at it. And I guess, you know, too, I don't read like all this in a day. I read 30 minutes a day while I'm walking on treadmill. That's how I read all these books. Every time I was done, I always just wanted to practice. It gave me that hunger, like, man, I want to do this one day. This is what I want to do. And this is the story. This is someone living the life that I want to live. Kind of. I don't want to be a fur trader. But it was just so motivational, and just, this is what I want to do with my life, you know? So that was really, really cool for me. So I highly recommend this book if you're planning on being an orchestral trumpet player. And like I said, if you're going to be an orchestral player or a trumpet player, I recommend it. It might not be on the top of your reading list, but it's great. If you're not one of those three, if you're a musician, yeah, I could see it. If you have interest in fur trade, there's some information about that in here. If you want to learn about, you know, what a person who had to give up a lot of stuff to get what he wanted, this is also a pretty good book. You might be a little bored with a lot of the trumpet stuff in here, but so I wouldn't recommend this to everyone, but it is good. I'll link below where I purchased this. I purchased this from the Chicago Symphony, the Symphony store. It cost me like 30 bucks, I think, so it is a bit expensive. It's not a long read. It's 230 pages about, so I'll link below where you can purchase it, because I don't think you can get it on Amazon or anything like that. So, like I said, I recommend it if you're one of those people. Well deserved spot on my shelf. So thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, please give me a big old thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any other videos. Comment below any other book suggestions, especially if you have any suggestions that are like also Sprock Arnold Jacobs Song and Wind, Within the Sphere of the Master, any music specific, maybe orchestral trumpet players, if you can do that. I saw one on Bill Vacchiano, I think, that I might pick up at some point, maybe a while from now. But I've got a bunch of backlog of books that I have to get through that aren't necessarily music related, but I love reading these music related books too. So please do comment any books like those three down below especially. So thanks so much for watching. See you on the next one.